Hey, do you remember when cinematic universes were cool? Me neither. But of course, I, like every other child circa 2012, was ecstatic at the prospect of superhero crossovers making their way to the movies. Avengers truly was this insane event, a time when the movies are seemingly gonna finally, truly capture the way the comics felt. But now that we're over a decade into this sort of thing being standard, how do I feel about it all? Nauseous! It all just makes me actively kind of annoyed now. When we were first getting info on the new Superman, the prospect of it containing Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, and Metamorpho didn't excite me. Instead, I was worried the film would be bogged down by being a backdoor pilot to a new universe when I really just wanted a squarely focused Superman movie. And while in the end, I think the movie handled those aspects about as well as it could, I would trade it in a heartbeat for a movie that actually has time to use his supporting cast. As it stands, the important elements of Superman's own world, like the Daily Planet, are pretty much playing second fiddle to James Gunn setting up wider universe stuff like the Authority movie that isn't even coming out, and I have to wonder what's even the point. And I know, people were begging for superheroes to interact in the movies for years, and here I am whining about it like an annoying fucking prick. But is this really what these movies should exist for? To smash our favorite action figures together as a substitute for interesting storytelling? Personally, my favorite modern comic book movie is The Batman, and it's not worried about wider universe bullshit whatsoever. It gets to carve out its own specific world for the Batman to reside in. Yeah, seeing Robert Pattinson's Batman and David Cornsweet's Superman interact on screen would be cool or whatever, but would it make the Batman's world better? No, all these movies ever succeed in doing these days is the flattening of a character's world and tone. Matt Reeves' Batman is so good because everything about the movie is tailored to him. He is given such a hyper-specific environment and atmosphere to inhabit. I don't have any desire to see him plopped in the middle of some prospective Justice League film where he, along with every other character, are forced to conform to one tone. The fun of any crossover like that should be in seeing these individual characters' defined worlds clash. But do any of these movies ever succeed in doing that? Not really. Let's talk about the MCU. It's the one that started this whole cinematic universe craze, and it just doesn't do it for me anymore. I'm not gonna get on here and tell you that Phase 1 of the MCU was perfect. It wasn't, not even close. But it certainly handled this specific thing I'm bitching about astronomically better. Look at these 4 early MCU movies. Say what you will about them, but you can't say they all feel the same. Captain America is inhabiting a very different world from Hulk or Thor. In the first Avengers movie, you really feel like these characters' tones and worlds are clashing. Character interactions are so strong in that movie because it really feels like you have a Shakespearean god talking to a soldier from World War II. For me, it is still the gold standard of team-up movies to this day for this very reason. It's something I feel the newer ones are just fundamentally lacking. In Endgame, everyone's just the standard MCU silly guy who all talking quips and ironic detachment. Gone is the Shakespearean god among mortals, now Thor has to fit into the modern MCU tone we've all become accustomed to, with superficial amounts of god talk spliced in between Russo-branded gags. One of my favorite lines in Infinity War is this:
"You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood."
This feels like something Spider-Man would say and perfectly explains why he's here. Which, of course, is why we had to add this fuck shit later.
Okay, that didn't really make sense, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
After all, we can't have our movie being too genuine and real for too long. The audience might get scared. But that second part isn't a thing Spider-Man would say. It is a thing Tony Stark would say. I mean, he's the ironically detached one, that's his whole thing. And they've given his whole thing to everyone. And that's the crux of my problem. I don't think being in a connected universe is being additive to these characters. Spider-Man doesn't get to exist in his own specific version of New York that works for him. No, he just has to be in the same bland New York that all the rest of these characters are in. In contrast, Raimi's New York feels so wholly specific to that version of Spider-Man. It's big and warm and grandiose, and it feels like a character in and of itself in those movies. The New York in No Way Home feels like a backdrop to normal MCU shenanigans. Were all old comic book movies good? Obviously not, but because they were so squarely focused on their title character, they were zeroed in on what makes that character's world special. You could not accuse a single pair of these movies of being homogenized in any way. A lot of those suck, I hear you say, and yeah, but at least they suck for vastly different reasons. These, despite starring completely different characters and being made by completely different people, all suck for basically the same reasons, and that bothers me. For all its numerous faults, the Daredevil movie was trying to be a Daredevil movie first and foremost. I can tell it was made by somebody genuinely passionate about the character, who wanted to define what Daredevil's own world looked like cinematically. Ant-Man Quantumania just wants to be your average big MCU movie. Peyton Reed doesn't give a shit what it means to adapt Ant-Man's stories to their own cinematic landscape. He was there to say, what does an Ant-Man story look like in this already established universe with its own already established rule set? A recent MCU thing I really do like is Fantastic Four First Steps, and it doesn't suffer from this problem at all. Matt Shakman gets to craft his own specific version of New York for these versions of the Fantastic Four, and it's my favorite aspect of the movie. The retro futuristic aesthetic these versions of the FF reside in feels like theirs, like they actually looked at the comics and found an interesting way to adapt the way they look and feel while also feeling unique to this movie's rendition of them. It really feels like that older style of comic book movie where they had to define these characters' worlds for the first time in a new medium and tailor it to them. I can't wait for them to throw it all away after Secret Wars inevitably folds them into the standard MCU Earth. Say goodbye to this beautiful, visually striking, tailor-made version of New York and say hello to this fucking shitfuck. Because truly unique visual identities don't get to exist in Hatman's world. I can only hope that the unique way these characters talk and move is retained, but I don't have faith that the Russo brothers won't simply fall back on their usual writing style for these upcoming Avengers movies. They already took the Fantastic Four's most important villain and slapped Mr. MCU in the role, so if that's anything to go by for how they'll handle the Fantastic Four in general, I'm scared. Now you might be asking, what about the comics though? I mean, the reason the movies are doing this in the first place is because the comics themselves have always existed in this sprawling, connected universe where all these characters coexist. Picture this. You're reading a comic about a whole new generation of mutants. It's a fun little X-Men book steeped in high school movie tropes, and for 15 issues, you're under the impression that this is all going somewhere. Not on my watch. Crossover events, because why let your artist tell coherent and consistent stories when you have books to sell? So because of the events in House of M, half of the characters we've been following in New X-Men so far are depowered and fucking murdered. Suddenly the book is overwhelmingly dark and steeped in fear. No longer is it a lighthearted high school movie, all these characters are fair game to fucking die. Now, as story interrupting as it all is, the book does manage to find its footing again. I would even say, for me personally, it's better from here on out. But that doesn't change that whatever the book was trying to be and accomplish before all this, that's gone now. But then Messiah Complex happens and the book just sort of ends, with these characters doomed to fade into the same obscurity as every other new up-and-coming young mutant team. The new X-Men title was actually one of my friend's first X books, and I remember them feeling quite burned by the way that the events affected it over the course of its run. And this sort of thing happens constantly, especially at Marvel. There are some truly great event books, but most are just story-breaking, pace-destroying cash grabs. And I even specifically like the Messiah trilogy quite a lot, but the way that these kinds of events interact with books that are even sort of tangentially related is not conducive to good storytelling. For another example, we have Nick Spencer's Captain America run, a book I really like up until a point. It was Sam Wilson's first proper long-term ongoing as Cap, and the narrative is very steeped in the kinds of reactions people were having to his tenure at the time. A hate-fueled public is rejecting Sam as he tries his best to carve out his own legacy as Captain America, trying to define what having this mantle means for him. The book is continuously proving that Sam is a great character who indeed can fill Steve's shoes and deserves to. But how can this book effectively get across its themes when it is over the course of its 24-issue run interrupted by not one, not two, but 3 event books? It gets to go for 6 whole issues before Avengers Standoff happens, which is immediately succeeded by Civil War II, for a total of 7 tie-in issues after the 6 regular ones. That's more than the regular ones. Then editorial is nice enough to grace the title with a total of 8 regular issues before showing up and saying, hey, Secret Empire's happening and we need to have Sam give the shield back to Steve. Sorry, you're gonna have to wrap that all up in 4 issues, fuck you. So what was the point of all that? You have an entire run dedicated to telling me that Sam deserves the mantle, and that he is just as fit to be Captain America as Steve ever was, that his bigoted detractors do not deserve the time of day, and it ends with him giving the shield back to Steve? I really don't envy all the writers and artists working at Marvel, because even if your book manages to not get canceled after 5 issues because it's not Spider-Man, even though he's the one that should be getting canceled, who's to say Marvel can't step in with a new crossover event that makes the story you're trying to tell ultimately pointless and incoherent? I can tell you what it seemed like Captain America Sam Wilson was trying to say, but I can't tell you what it ultimately actually says. How do you say something thematically if the root of your themes are ripped up because sales are low and Marvel hit the emergency event button for the 10th time that year? But what are some crossovers in comics that you do like, I hear you ask? Ones that, don't fucking matter? At least not in the way event books matter, where they exist to shake up the status quo in a way that is either actively destructive or ultimately pointless. The best crossovers are ones like this. This is Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. In this run, the hook is that Matt Murdock's identity is revealed to the world, and we have to follow him for the rest of the time, trying to actively put the genie back in the bottle. And other characters appear throughout in little roles. Like, for instance, Daredevil number 34, where directly after Matt's identity is put in the paper, J. Jonah Jameson is barking at his employees to find more about it all. Ben Urich and Peter Parker both openly say they know who Daredevil is and that it's not him to cover for Matt. It's a small moment I really love because Peter Parker's own interior tone does not take over the book for the moment he's here. He's here to adapt to the tone of Daredevil's book. This is how you use crossovers. Peter Parker being here is not intrusive to the narrative being told. He is basically treated like set dressing to Daredevil's book. His inclusion feels completely natural and earned because he inhabits Daredevil's world. He doesn't bring the one outside in. Because that's the thing about my favorite comics in general. The best comics, to me, while residing in a wider universe, exist in their own corner of it. Daredevil by Bendis and Maleev is entirely its own thing, with its pulpy, run-down aesthetic that runs through the entire book in a way that was so different from anything else happening at the time. And everything in it is entirely there to service Matt's world and the story that Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev were telling with this one specific Daredevil run. Imagine if instead of a story about Matt slowly descending into a state of mania as he tries desperately to hold his life together, it was in the middle, just sort of interrupted by some event called Mephisto Resets the Marvel Universe or some bullshit, and Matt's identity is just reverted by that, before we get a chance to chew on what that means for the character. Luckily, I made that one up, and this run is basically perfect. But this kind of thing happens to comics all the time. Way too often at Marvel, the short-term popularity of big, universe-defining stuff is focused on rather than just telling good, individual stories. Announcing a Civil War 5 or whatever and stuffing every title you can think of with tie-in issues might boost sales temporarily, but it's effectively kneecapping the stories these books can tell and the audiences for them. I'm a completionist psycho who's already too far gone in this hobby to stop reading a title even when it's interrupted by nonsense, but the average person is not willing to put up with this stuff. You try to hand a first-time reader a comic that is interrupted by multiple event books, and they're gonna rightfully skewer you. Comics already have enough bullshit making them appear inaccessible to beginners. Tie-in comics make them seem not only less accessible, but f***ing annoying. I'm a seasoned reader, and they piss me off. Who wants to read a perfectly good story that gets interrupted in the middle because Marvel wants to do another event where Tony Stark fights his teammates? And if you raised your hand, put it the f*** back down, sicko. So since I've bitched for an adequate amount of time, what do I actually want to happen? Well, despite my whining, I don't actually want connected universes to go away. They're too intrinsically tied to comics as a medium, and they add such unique storytelling opportunities. But The interconnectedness should never take precedent over good storytelling, which I just think it so often does. Ideally, every solo superhero title would be structured like Daredevil by Bendis, Immortal Hulk by Ewing, or Action Comics by Grant Morrison. These are books that establish tones and worlds wholly tailored to the title characters and their supporting casts. And most importantly, they're runs that have specific stories to tell and things to say, unimpeded by the wider universe while still being able to interact with it in a way that works for the run instead of against. And I'm not even totally against event books. Some are great, but they need to be created with more mindfulness about how they interact narratively with different solo titles. I am against tie-in issues, though. They are almost always cumbersome and antithetical to telling a good narrative, except in the case of something like Abnett Lanning's Guardians run, where the events are directly spin-offs of that run and a part of its narrative. Which, therein lies the solution. Just only do tie-in issues for the books that the events are directly spinning off of. But Marvel would rather blow their offices up than do something that makes their stories more accessible and good. And the solution is virtually the same for the movies. I just want comic book movies to feel distinct from each other again. And I want individual characters to be given movies that are fully steeped in said character's own world in the way that the Batman is. I want to hope that Man of Tomorrow will be far more solely focused on Superman and his supporting cast, but I worry we're just never going to get that with this version of Cal. But, on the brighter side, it does seem like James Gunn is allowing a lot of freedom within his DCU for individual creatives, and I have hope there can be a lot of great stuff there. If WB doesn't abandon it in a couple years, that is. And obviously, I want all these things for the MCU as well. But I just think that franchise is too far gone. I'm sure we'll continue to get good projects here and there, but with Doomsday and Secret Wars around the corner, I just don't think that it's course correcting in a positive direction. Seriously, when the next Fantastic Four comes out and it's inevitably set in boring-ass, bland-ass MCU New York, I'm gonna have a fucking aneurysm. Anyway, moral of the story, go read indie comics and watch real movies instead.